Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Badon Hill by Anonymous, which is the sequel to Gurzel, which I previously read. So the author had sent me a copy of Gurzel before, and then now I have that fancy hardcover version that I talked about in my book haul video. And then also sent me the sequel once it came out here. So got this one, which the cover still makes me think of Horizon Zero Dawn. The ARC version is kind of dimmer, so you can't tell as much, but that's kind of what I thought, even though it's very different. But just kind of pop that in here with it. But this was a very enjoyable book. So the first one, I didn't enjoy it, and it included and this is just as a refresher, if you're watching this and haven't seen my review for the first book, which I will leave down below. But this is, for the most part, historical fiction with some very definite fantasy elements in it as well. And the first book was looking at quite a lot of different areas and settings and people, some of which that I was less familiar with. And so I actually chatted with the author afterwards, and he kind of sent me some stuff talking about some of the different actual events and people that are in the novel, essentially, like that, and which was really interesting. And this is where we really start to kick it up a notch in regards to the overall plot. This book also, though, does spend a lot more time in the kind of Arthurian legend type mix. So I enjoyed that just because I've always been a fan of Arthurian legend type things. Get a lot more of that here, so characters I'm more familiar with, although with a kind of a different spin on quite a few of them as well. It's not just going to be like the characters as you know them, and it very much has that different feel. So this does continue off right where the last book left off, but we're starting to really get the kind of big picture going. In the first book, some of the plot lines felt like they were a little bit more separate, and they were still connected a bit, but it's starting to really kind of wrap things full circle, even though we, have literally things from events that are in Britain, events that are in Northern Africa, and so kind of a wide variety of settings and everything that we're looking at here. So this one continues on with it as well. So I feel like this does build upon the first book, and I ended up having I enjoyed this one more and thought it was a bit stronger in terms of just kind of pulling everything together. Part of it too, I feel like, I kind of knew what I was getting into. I had the familiarity with the Arthurian stuff, but I actually, funnily enough, because of the fact that I said I really enjoyed that, I had the familiar with the Arthurian parts, but also the events that are happening in the Byzantine location in Northern Africa. I also actually really liked the POV character there, who was also in the first book, but I liked more in this book, even though there's a lot less of that POV. I'm guessing, based on where things are going, there's going to be quite a lot more from that POV in the next book as well, but really wrapping it around. So the base setup here is it is looking at some real historical events, but of course with the dragon Gurzel in the mix, who is kind of like this, evil, quite literally dragon. I was going to say evil entity. He is an evil entity, but he's also quite literally a dragon. But Gurzel, who is has all of the kind of things, his own designs, things that he's wanting to do, as well as we're looking at all of these other arching plot lines. And this starts to reveal a little bit more of the pieces of the tapestry, so to speak, of what's really going to be going on. And there's more at play and more at stake here than it seems, is kind of what this starts to flash at. So there's definitely some foreshadowing there, showing what's going to be happening in the next book. So I'm not sure when the next book comes out. I am very curious to see where this ends up going as well. In this one, as far as the things that I didn't like as much, I really did not like Guinevere, which I think is intentional. You're not really supposed to like Guinevere, but I wasn't really a fan of that character, or just kind of the presentation of that character a whole lot, which, once again, is very obviously intentional. There's a few characters in here that, even if they're familiar characters, they're not exactly going to be, once again, the way that they're portrayed to be, or they might be like a different spin on it. And so you definitely get that, and I think that's fairly common with a lot of stuff when you're taking like the historical fiction route, but then adding some more unique elements, which this is kind of doing. There's a lot of different historical elements here. It's interesting too because and I'm getting off topic, but I'm going to finish this thought and then wrap back. It's interesting too because like the epigraphs before each chapter are actual quotes. Often they have something to do with the real historical events that are being portrayed, even though if they're happening in a different way. In this book especially, they're sometimes used to kind of present things in a different light, where you have the actual text and then you have the chapter, and there's a specific one that stands into mind, and I'm not going to get into details because I don't want to have spoilers here, especially with this being a second book. But there's a specific one where it talks about what happens to this particular character, and then we see what actually happened, which is very different from what is in that little text portion we just read in the epigraph. But it's one of those things where you could absolutely see it being written that way, not knowing what actually happened too. So kind of just that idea that things change, and with the introduction here, it really kind of paints it in that light. Like it's presented as like this is the true telling of what happened. You know, history sometimes changed, but here's what really happened there too. And so it's done in a interesting way, and you sometimes get that juxtaposition between what's the purported history and what actually happened. It's not really changing the history, it's just taking a look at it from a different angle as well, which I feel like is a really interesting way to do it, because especially if you're familiar with the historical events in here, which I read up a bit after the first book on some other things too. I think there's a lot to enjoy here, but even if you're not as much, this book, for one, since you have more of like, you know, Arthur and the Camelot Knights and kind of those parts too, most people are at least somewhat familiar with those characters, so that helps with that familiarity. But even the people that I was completely unfamiliar with, I'm just starting to really enjoy the way that the plots are coming together. It's the first book is a lot. The first book is kind of the more spreading out, a lot of things happening with the bits that tie it together. But this book is where you start to really see the different sorts of plots come together. We have some things revealed about some characters. We see what motivations are for some characters, and we're still trying to figure out ultimately what the big picture is going to be. But it just handles the bringing together of lots of different settings and historical events together really, really well with this. It did a great job with it, and this is, even though the book, I took way longer to read this than I should have, just because my reading time's been pretty minimal, and I've been slower with my physical reads lately if you've seen my updates, but the pacing here was really good. You're moving in, seeing a lot of different things, and I feel like the characters too get quite a lot of development. Even some that we hadn't seen as much before, and some that we had in the first book more prominently as well. We start to get more. There are, and I mentioned this because I had no issue with it, but I know some people don't like the use of flashbacks quite a lot. This does have a fair amount of flashbacks where it's not like the full-on, like, then, you know, this happened during here, but as we are starting POVs with some characters, we get some time of them basically like we're being told what happened in their past. So it's still a flashback, but done in that kind of format, like it relates to what's happening in the chapter as well. And so I know some people aren't a huge fan of that. It worked, I think, really well here for me, and it was a good way of continuing to show the history of these characters, especially because often one POV's kind of flashback that's being talked about also affects other POV characters as well. So it's kind of getting that extra amount there. It never felt like an info dump to me because it was specifically to the character development. And for a book that has as many like historical things happening, the fact that we get a lot of background just from the epigraphs that are usually pretty short, I think it's really well done, because this is one of those things where you could just try to dump a whole bunch of history. And like I said, talking to the author after, he sent me some stuff because I was really curious about some of these events and some of the things that I just simply wasn't aware of, because I'm not like super up on my history, even though I've always found it interesting. So like there's a lot of stuff too, like you can look up these events, and so I think once again, and I know the people who are really more into history than I am have enjoyed this even more than me, and I've enjoyed the heck out of it without even knowing a ton of the history or anything like that either. So definitely I think it's something that you can enjoy. I never did get back to my point that I was making earlier. I just not realized. But I'm just going to assume that I did wrap it up enough. But I said I was going to get back after my tangent, but hey, so that's when you do the just reviews where I like to kind of talk through my thoughts and let them flow naturally, which is helpful when I film them shortly after, like I did with this one. So there's a lot of the thoughts there with it, but overall really enjoying it. So I still think my favorite character here is George. I've enjoyed his plotline, and it seems like there's a lot more to happen with that character. And like I said too, like you do in this book, like you get to see King Arthur, and you get some of the knights like Lancelot, and you have Galahad, you got Merlin in here, you got Guinevere, you got Morgana, mention of some others as well. So getting a lot of that in here, but in kind of some different ways, and so it works pretty well. I will say in the first book, one of my critiques is that there was a fair amount of language that didn't always feel like it fit the time period. And I have to say, as I was reading this, there is still some of that language in there, and it just didn't bother me as much. And I kind of thought about it, and I'm like, it's pretty normal, and that's just the tone I think the author is going for. You have the actual excerpts that are written in the very time-sensitive thing, but I feel like it's pretty normal to update language like that, and especially this one kept making me think of the show Merlin, which absolutely did that, and I love that show anyway, so I'm like, I thought about it, and I realized I'm like, I don't really care anymore. So that was one of those things with the first one. And I know some things were updated here, and some things may be updated here too, because this is an ARC version, so it's not the final version that I was reading. The book is out though. It took me a little bit longer to get to it than I wanted to, but really just a lot to like here. And I really feel like the graphic back here on the chess pieces is just a really good representation too, because we really are looking at these large scale events and kind of all of the different moving pieces. You've got lots of people who think they're in charge or they're in control, and you have the people who are the pawns by other people, and just a lot of different kings and kingdoms and all kinds of people in action and everything. So there's a ton of moving pieces, and I'm very interested to see how it all is going to come together. There's a lot of things that are being set up well, but this book toward the end makes me think that there's some things we don't know about yet that are also going to be revealed. So really interested to see where it goes. So those really are my thoughts on Badon Hill Book 2 in The Wars of Wrath, I believe. I don't think I actually said the series name earlier, but Badon Hill, which is Book 2 and sequel to Gurzel. This is available now. I'll make sure that I link to it down below for it as well. It's got the ebook and the physical available, and probably audio, because Gurzel got audio later, but I don't think that's out yet. So I will link to it if you are interested in it. If you're somebody who did read Gurzel, I mean, this for me, I thought this was better than Gurzel, and Gurzel was a book I enjoyed. So definitely a series that's continuing to get better. So definitely check that out. And if you haven't heard of it, like I said, you can check the description for my link to the review I did for the first book, Gurzel, if you want to know more about that one as well. But really, those are my thoughts. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizardly Do It Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, any books, really anything at all. It is a lot of fun, and we would love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.